Hello, my name's Dale Adams of Planning Ahead of Time, and on this week's Pat Chat, I'm speaking with Steve Game-Blackmoor of Last Rites. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this Pat Chat. Um, I'm Steve Game-Blackmoor, as you've said, from Last Rites. Last Rites is a service that is there before, during, and after the funeral. Before, in the sense that we're there to support people in the very, very early stages after a loved one dies, to kind of signpost them, listen to them, put them at ease, because often people panic during those first few moments. Call the funeral director and not local funeral director from up the road, and everything's taken off them from there
Yes.
on in. So what we're attempting to do is to slow things down a little bit. There's no rush. Consider your options, and then point them in the right direction. After which, then, if they would like us to, is we then move on to sorting the service out, the ceremony. So I can't visit the family, talk about very safely about sensitive information, which is then garnered and delivered in a way that's unique to that person and to the family in whatever format or style that they see fit. And I do the delivering of the ceremonies. And then after that, if anybody within the family feels that they're struggling and would like further professional support, then we're there for them after the funeral, anytime after the funeral, years sometimes, in a professional way. So that's one-to-one support. But I also lead some bereavement support groups as well.
Okay, that's interesting you say about sort of just slowing things down when somebody's died, because it is what you hear quite a lot, that it's instantly, if they're in a hospital, somebody comes in and they believe they have to leave and the body has to be sort of taken away straight away. Or when they're at home, the first thing they have to do is inform somebody. And it is all a rush. And for me, when my mum died, I wanted to spend time with her, sort of saying the goodbyes and doing some little rituals really that I wanted to do before walking away from her body, feeling for me that her spirit had left it. I mean, how do you advise people with that?
Well, in a number of ways. First of all, we kind of reassure them that they're in safe hands, because I think that's really important during those early stages, that we're not there to sell or anything like that. We're there to just guide and to support them. And often people feel the need to call someone, like you say. Who do I call?
Yeah.
Who's the first person I call? Well, we tend to say, well, have you called family? Because actually the family are the last people in the first initial stages who are contacted. Who's your next of kin? Who's the person that can come and support you and be with you, especially if they're at home,
Yes.
and the person that they love has died at home. The first thing they need to do, of course, is call a doctor in those situations. But they don't need to call anyone else other than family, someone to be there to support them. So that's what we kind of bring them back to earth a little.
Yeah.
That's what we attempt to do. Do we have to call the funeral director? No, you don't. In fact, you can do that tomorrow if you want to. You don't have to do that now. All you need to do now are these things.
Yes,
We also partner up with White Balloon. Are you familiar with White Balloon?
I
They,
am.
they feature on our website. I mean, fantastic service, free service. Their planner is superb, and that features in the early stages section of our website as well. That's used quite a lot. Yeah.
Yes, I do know them. Okay, so then obviously when you go on to the funeral, I've read one of your blogs recently for asking you to come on, where you stated about the importance of a funeral. I
Mhm.
agree with that. So what is your view in relation to somebody having a funeral?
I have grave concerns about the current trend in direct, non-attended They call them funeral services, but they're not funerals, are they really? It's a
No.
disposal. And my concern, I can understand, like you say, people opting that for themselves because they don't want to be a burden to the family. I can also understand people opting for that because of lack of funds.
Yes.
But this is what concerns me because as a bereavement practitioner, as a grief specialist, I'm concerned about what happens to them beyond the day of the funeral. And I passionately believe that a funeral ceremony, an opportunity to ritualistically say farewell and to spend time with friends and family together in order to do that, is a crucial, pivotal springboard for moving and navigating grief beyond that. When we talk about the people that we serve beyond the funeral, I would say a good number of those people are as a result of those who have chosen not to have a funeral ceremony.
Really?
Yeah. So it does cause complicated grief. And that's a grave concern of mine. We're also dehumanizing what is essentially very human, but also an animal instinct. Because if you look at the animal kingdom, they have rituals and end of life rituals, just like we do. Perhaps not as complex, they don't play music, but nonetheless they have it. So it's a natural animal and human instinct to want to gather around the person we love, to remember them, to honour them, however simple that may be, or however straightforward that may be. I think it's important to do something. I mean, very recently, I served a family who were not in a position financially to do what they wanted to do. So I helped them as much as possible by doing something with them in their own home.
Mm.
And we led something in their own home. And we organised for an independent funeral director who was serving the family at the time for them to do a drive past.
Right.
He was on his way to the crematorium. So we all stood after a short ceremony in the home, waving goodbye to him. Even something as straightforward as that is better than nothing.
Well, I 100% agree with you. I personally feel that, as you say, having that time to honour somebody and also say what you want to say out loud and that be witnessed and have people there, because people come to funerals who you may not even are aware of know the person, because and that's what happened with my mum's and other people I speak to. I was doing something yesterday, and when I was talking to a couple about the funeral of their mother, I said, but people came that you didn't even know knew her. And they said, yes, they did. So it allowed them to hear stories about her that they didn't even know and meet people that had been touched by her life that they weren't aware of. And that in itself brought so much comfort, and having these people come out to take time out of their day to come and say goodbye and support the family in honouring their mom was lovely when they were talking about it. And I think there's something so important about being in unity in that grief and that sorrow, and then being able to have the stories and hear things about your loved one and what that person meant to people, because we touch so many lives that we're not even aware of.
Well, this is it, but it's also an opportunity for people to express their grief
Mm.
and together, and
Yes.
to comfort one another together. And when I'm opening up a ceremony, when I officiate a service, I'll always start with coming together. We come together to celebrate Bert or Jill or whatever the person's name is, and and it's important that we come together, because in coming together, we can remember and we can celebrate who they were and their place in our lives. And I do go to town with that introductory way, because I think the coming together is very important. So I do emphasise that for those reasons. Yeah.
I think what you've just said as well is about something that can be a smaller gathering, is equally as important, because it's still having that time and that ability to
Indeed.
say we did something. And I spoke to somebody recently where it was a child that they'd lost, as in a baby, that they'd lost a baby. And I said, did you ever do anything? And they were still carrying the grief of the loss of that baby years and years later, because they said no, they didn't. People knew that they'd lost a baby, but nothing was ever done. And I said, do it now. Now, it might be years down the line, but you still need to do something. And she said, yeah, that felt right for her, because we still want to do something where we do the honoring, the remembering, and knowing that that soul lived and was around. And I just think it's so important, however small it is. It's the
It is
ability to do
important.
something for
Yeah,
that person, and like you said, together.
yeah, very much so.
Because I don't think people always understand that you don't have to do a ceremony in a church or a crematorium. You can actually do it in the local pub if you like. And as you've just said, you can do something in someone's home. So it doesn't have to be that particular way, does it?
No, or in the funeral home if it's a smaller gathering.
Yeah.
Even in the chapel of rest. I've done small ceremonies in the chapel of rest. Often in those circumstances, very sadly, it's because they're not able to fund anything more. They want something more, and this is my big concern,
Yes.
that people are choosing the option of not having a funeral because they can't afford it.
And do you think when people are, for me, obviously planning ahead of time for sort of their end of life, they're stating that they don't want a funeral because they don't want to put that financial pressure on their family if they know that maybe they don't have the funds to cover their funeral?
I'm in two minds with this. You see, I don't think personally it's the person who's died call. It's not their call because they're not here.
Right.
The funeral, in my view, is for the living. So I do have concerns about, I mean, if it was for the person I am, if it was left up to me, I would probably opt no funeral service. But it's not for me. It's not for me, as far as I'm concerned, to make that choice for my family and to burden them with that choice. I mean, it does become a burden for many. And sadly, we don't get to hear of that because only through one-to-ones and bereavement support groups do we get to hear the consequences of those decisions.
Whereas I think for me, what I feel is that if sometimes that it's the person who's putting it into a will, or do you want a cremation, do you want a burial, what do you want for your end of life wishes, when they're making a will or any end of life plans, and then they put, I'm happy with direct cremation. And as you say, that is, I think, about them making a decision to try not to have a financial burden on their family. But I
Yeah,
also agree with you that a funeral is about the living. It is about them coming together for the support of each other and to say their farewells
yeah,
in that way. But when I'm looking at the end of life planning side, I think people may be making the decision because they are concerned about what a funeral will cost and they don't want to put that onto their family
yeah,
without thinking about the consequences of money over emotion.
yeah. Yeah, I think there is that concern. I think people just do it because they don't feel they deserve anything more than that. So it comes from a place of humility. Um, and that's not to decry humility because it's a good value. But I think in this sense, we're not being humble, really. What we're actually doing is burdening our family with grief.
Yes. And interesting that you say a lot of, if you like, some of the grief work that you have to do beyond the funeral is for those who haven't been able to be at a ceremony and a gathering together to
Yeah,
pay their respects.
and I'll push that a little bit further because during COVID, for example, it was quite common for people not to be able to attend the ceremony, and so a lot of ceremonies were webcast or live streamed out to people. And there was one ceremony I did in Aberystwyth during COVID, and only 6 people could attend at the time.
Mhm.
and so, but he was a very popular person that was known worldwide. And so how I put that ceremony together was to get everyone to video record themselves, offering a tribute to this person. And I kind of spliced that all together, turned up the ceremony in front of the 6 people, and then streamlined all of those different videos across the world. And it meant so much to those people that couldn't be there physically to see themselves in that room along with the immediate family.
Oh, that's given me goosebumps, Steve. That's just lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of doing
This
it.
crematorium's beautiful setting as well.
Okay. So what would your advice be to people who are considering just having a direct cremation for their relative?
My advice would be very simple. Think not about yourself, think about your family and how they're going to cope with not having that opportunity to say farewell to you and to celebrate your life. And consider that. And there are all sorts of ways that you can do that. It doesn't have to be, like you say, at a crematorium or in church. It can be small, it can be intimate. But I think it's even if they want to get together and have a meal at a pub and just remember around a table, allow them to do that because that's for them.
Yes.
You can still have the direct cremation, but don't deprive them of being able to celebrate and say goodbye.
That's it. Again, you've used the word of celebration, and it is that person has lived, however long that is
Yeah.
been for. They have lived, and therefore they've touched a lot of lives in that lifetime. And I think it's important to
It,
do something to celebrate the life that they had.
I mean, celebrate is the same as saying give thanks. So having that opportunity, and I always make a big thing of this, within the ceremony, where we say thank you to that person for all the things that we want to thank them for, despite whether or not we believe they can hear what we're saying. I don't think that matters. What matters is just having that opportunity to say thank you before we then say goodbye.
Yeah.
And it can be as small or as large as you want that to be, or can afford for that to be.
Oh, I think it's lovely what you're doing and the fact that you are trying to make it so that people slow, it's more personal, that they actually have time around the death of somebody.
Yeah.
Because I do think when it happens, it's also fast, isn't it? Especially when things come about unexpectedly. And
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you sort of catch up, and by the time people have that person has been cremated or buried, they realize it's all happened very quickly, and then they seem to sit in that, what do we do now, what do we do next, and what's happening. And I think being able to slow it down probably help people so much to actually come to terms with some of it as they're going through it. Have I made sense with what I've just said?
No, it resonates with me because I suppose my journey as an independent started in 2003, really, when I met my wife, and she had Katie, who was 6 years old at the time, and she died, unfortunately, with glioblastoma, a brain tumour. I was with her that evening, and I encouraged her. You don't have to call anyone. Spend as much time with Katie as you possibly can. We spent most of the evening and into the night until dawn the next morning, and that's when we called the funeral director.
So
And we
you lived
washed
it.
Katie, we sat with her, we played music, and it was such a precious time, so precious. Yeah, that's why I want to slow things down, because I know the importance of it firsthand.
And I think that's why a lot of people within this industry, I know people don't always like that word, but within this industry are here because of experiences that they've had and how they want to make changes that help other people. and
Yeah,
helping people through it.
absolutely. Yeah.
And for you, living that experience, a lot of people, as you rightly said at the start, wouldn't know that they could do that.
They wouldn't know. And, a lot of people don't. Vast majority of people have no idea. They just think funeral director, crematorium, or burial. The first things that comes into their mind is the traditional. Well, we're not very good at talking about death in the UK. So the planning of things. I would encourage people to plan things like this well in advance, to talk about it. Visited a family today who hadn't, they didn't want to talk about it, but the person who died did. Isn't that sad?
And again, you hear it, don't you, that sometimes, again, when someone's got a terminal illness as well, and that they'll try and say to people, look, this is what I want. And the family basically brush it over. Oh, no, well, we've got time, or because they don't want to actually think about it, even though they know that there is such as a timeline on it. And yet we're doing it all the time because we've all got a timeline.
Yeah.
We just don't know what it is.
No.
And I think it is so important to talk about it, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this, just to have some of the conversations and allow people to know that there is something different that can be done if they choose to and they look into it a little bit.
Yes. And the website that we provide, I think, is quite informative. It's got a lot of information on there. But I'm going to give White Balloon another plug because it's just a fabulous website. If any of your listeners hadn't seen what they do, just go and Google it and have a look. They make it so easy, and it's such a gentle space.
Yes, yeah. It is very nice. And as you say, there's so much information about planning and what you need to do, and information and resources on their website. So I do think and even the website itself, there's something very peaceful about their website, isn't there?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Very well designed, very well thought out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And so if people would like to get hold of you, Steve, to talk about what you do or just have a look at what you do, what are your contact details? How do they get to your website?
www.lastrites.ltd. It's
Okay.
as simple as that.
Yeah.
Or they can contact me on 0333 200 7391.
Okay. Would you like to just say that again?
0333 200 7391.
Okay. And Last Rites, although it's on the bottom of the screen, is LASTRITES.LTD for your website and your phone number. That's lovely. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. I think it's been really interesting, and it's nice to know what you're doing to help people through the end of life and the process of death, basically.
It's great what you're doing as well. I'm looking at it all quite regularly. So but thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.